Who is coming?
Take this. You must be brave. You have to be very brave, love.
At 17, her own mother sold her, traded like cattle in a winter market to the cruelest lord in all of Russia. They whispered that Lord Vsevolod had buried 3 brides beneath the snow, that his heart was carved from ice, that no woman who entered his estate ever walked out alive. But the night Praskovya stepped through those iron gates, she uncovered a secret that could shatter an empire. The cruel lord she had been sold to was not a man at all. If forbidden love and dangerous secrets are your weakness, subscribe now and stay with me, because this is just the beginning. The morning Praskovya turned 17, her mother did not bake bread. That was the first sign. For 16 years, every birthday had begun the same way. The smell of warm rye drifting through the small wooden cottage, her mother humming softly by the stove, a single beeswax candle waiting on the windowsill. But on this morning, the kitchen was cold, the stove was empty, and her mother sat at the table with her hands folded so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Praskovya stood in the doorway in her thin nightdress, her dark braid falling over one shoulder. She asked her mother if something was wrong. Her mother did not answer. She only stared at the small wooden cross hanging above the door, her lips moving without sound, as though she were begging God to forgive her for something she had not yet done. The village of Ostrovka was quiet that winter. Snow had fallen for 3 nights without rest, burying the road that led to Moscow, burying the river, burying the graves where Praskovya's father slept. He had died when she was 9, leaving them with a leaking roof, 2 thin goats, and a debt no widow could ever hope to repay. Praskovya had grown into a girl the village called too beautiful for her own good. The baker's wife crossed herself when she walked past. The young men whispered behind her shoulder. And old Yermolai, the priest, told her mother that beauty in a poor girl was a curse, not a blessing. But Praskovya did not feel cursed. She felt only the weight of small, quiet things. The way her hands cracked from washing other people's linen in cold water. The way her stomach folded in on itself some nights, when there was only 1 piece of black bread between 2 mouths. The way her mother had stopped looking at her, somewhere in the last year, as if meeting her daughter's eyes had become too painful to bear. There was one bright thing in her life. His name was Ilya, the blacksmith's son. He had loved her since they were children chasing geese through the summer mud. He had promised, only last week, that by spring he would have saved enough to ask for her hand. He had pressed a small iron ring into her palm and told her to keep it hidden until the day he could give her a proper one. That ring was tied on a cord around her neck now. It rested cold against her skin as she watched her mother weep silently into the empty table. Then came the sound. Hooves, heavy hooves, breaking through the snow on the road that no one used in winter. Her mother's head lifted slowly. Her face was the colour of ash. Praskovya whispered, asking who was coming. Her mother did not answer. Her mother only rose from the table, walked to the small wooden chest by the bed, and pulled out a dress Praskovya had never seen before. A dress of dark red wool, lined with rabbit fur, far too fine for any peasant girl to own. It had been hidden there. For how long, Praskovya did not know. Her mother held it out to her with shaking hands and said, in a voice that did not sound like her own, that she had to be brave now, that she had to be very, very brave. The hooves stopped outside the cottage. A fist struck the door 3 times, slow, heavy, final, and Praskovya, clutching Ilya's iron ring against her heart, understood that the life she had known was already over. She just did not yet know what she had been sold for. The door opened before her mother could reach it. Cold air rushed into the cottage like a living thing, carrying with it the smell of horses and leather and something darker, something Praskovya could not name. 3 men stood in the doorway. 2 were soldiers, dressed in long black coats with silver buttons that caught the grey morning light. The 3rd was a thin man in a fur hat, holding a rolled parchment against his chest as though it were a sword. The thin man stepped inside without being invited. His eyes moved across the room, across the empty stove, across the small wooden cross, across Praskovya, standing barefoot in her nightdress with the red wool dress crumpled in her arms. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. He asked if this was the house of the widow Anastasia. Her mother nodded. She could not seem to find her voice. The thin man unrolled the parchment and read aloud in a flat, bored tone, the way a butcher might read a list of meats. The widow Anastasia of the village of Ostrovka had taken a sum of 200 silver roubles from the estate of Lord Vsevolod Mikhailovich Karenin in the autumn of the previous year. The debt was now due. The terms of repayment had been agreed upon in writing. The girl Praskovya, daughter of the said widow, was to be delivered into the household of Lord Karenin on this day, the morning of her 17th year. Praskovya did not understand at first. The words sat in the air like smoke. She looked at her mother. Her mother would not look back. She whispered her mother's name. Just once. Soft, like a child waking from a dream. Her mother fell to her knees on the wooden floor and began to weep, not quietly now, not the silent weeping of the table. This was the howling of an animal caught in a trap, the sound a woman makes when she has done something she cannot take back. She crawled across the floor and clutched at Praskovya's bare feet and begged her to forgive her. She said there had been no other way. She said the winter would have killed them both. She said Lord Karenin had promised that the girl would be cared for, dressed in silks, fed every day, treated with kindness. Praskovya looked down at her mother and felt nothing. For one terrible moment, she felt absolutely nothing at all. Then the cold rushed in, cold in her chest, cold in her hands, cold sliding down her spine like meltwater. She thought of Ilya. She thought of the iron ring against her skin. She thought of spring and the promise he had made, and the way he had kissed her knuckles as though they were something holy. She turned to the thin man and said she would not go. The thin man's smile did not change. He told her, very gently, that this was not a question she was being asked. He told her the soldiers were here for one reason, and that reason was to make sure the debt was paid by silver or by flesh. He told her the Lord had been patient. He told her the Lord was not a patient man by nature. One of the soldiers stepped forward. He did not touch her. He only stood close enough that she could smell the vodka on his breath and see the dried mud on the hem of his coat. She thought of running. The forest was 100 paces from the door. She knew every path. She had hidden there as a child. For one wild heartbeat, she felt her legs ready to move. But then she looked at her mother, still weeping on the floor, and she understood. If she ran, the soldiers would kill her mother for the debt. They would burn the cottage. They would leave nothing behind. So she did not run. She did the bravest thing she had ever done in her short life. She walked to the small wooden chest. She picked up the red wool dress. She walked behind the curtain that separated her sleeping place from the rest of the cottage. And she dressed herself, slowly, with hands that would not stop shaking, in the clothes that had been bought with her own body. When she stepped out, the thin man nodded, satisfied. He told her the carriage was waiting. He told her the journey to the estate would take 2 days. He told her, almost as an afterthought, that she should not bother bringing anything from her old life. Where she was going, none of it would matter. She did not look at her mother again. She could not. If she looked, she would break, and something inside her, something newborn and trembling and fierce, was beginning to whisper that she could not afford to break. Not yet. Not until she understood what kind of man had paid 200 silver rubles for a girl he had never seen. The carriage was black, lacquered, drawn by 4 grey horses that snorted clouds into the freezing air. Praskovya had never seen a carriage so fine. The door swung open, and the thin man gestured for her to climb inside, the way a man gestures to a dog. She climbed in. The seats were lined with dark green velvet, worn thin in places by other bodies, other journeys. She wondered, with a sickness rising in her throat, how many other girls had sat where she now sat. She wondered if any of them had ever come back. The door slammed shut. The lock turned from the outside. She was not a guest. She was cargo. The carriage lurched forward, and Ostrovka began to slide away through the small frosted window, the cottage, the crooked fence, the smoke from the baker's chimney. And then, at the very edge of the village, she saw him, Ilya. He was running through the snow with no coat, his shirt open at the throat, his black hair wild around his face. He had heard. Someone had told him. He was shouting her name, his voice cracking on the cold air, and his hand was outstretched toward the carriage as if he could pull it back through sheer will. Praskovya pressed her palm against the freezing glass. She could not open the window. She could not call out. She could only watch him grow smaller and smaller until he was a black smudge against the white road, and then nothing at all. Something inside her chest tore. She did not cry. She had decided, in the small moments behind the curtain, that she would not give them her tears. Tears were for girls who still believed someone was coming to save them. She was not that girl any longer. She had become something else in the space of a single morning, and she did not yet know its name. The journey lasted 2 days. On the first night, the carriage stopped at a roadside inn, and a woman was sent in to her. She was old, with silver hair pulled tight against her skull, and eyes the colour of wet stone. She introduced herself as Glafira, the head housekeeper of the Karenin estate. She had been sent ahead to prepare the new arrival. Glafira did not smile. She did not speak with cruelty either. She spoke the way a doctor speaks before cutting into a wound, plainly, without softness. She told Praskovya that there were rules in the Lord's house, that she must never speak unless spoken to, that she must never enter the east wing under any circumstance, that she must never, under pain of dismissal, ask the other servants about the Lord's previous brides. Praskovya asked, very quietly, if there had truly been 3. Glafira's hands stilled on the brush she was running through Praskovya's long, dark hair. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the wind beating against the shutters. Glafira said only that the dead should be left to their rest, and that the living should learn quickly if they wished to remain among them. Then she met Praskovya's eyes in the small, foggy mirror, and Praskovya saw something there that she had not expected. Not cruelty, not pity. Something closer to warning. Something closer to a woman who had once, long ago, been young herself, and had learned things she could not unlearn. Glafira leaned close, and whispered that the girl should keep her wits sharp, that the Lord's house held more secrets than the graveyard behind the chapel, that nothing in that place was what it seemed. Not the servants, not the walls, not the Lord, especially not the Lord. Praskovya wanted to ask what she meant. She opened her mouth to ask. But Glafira had already turned away, gathering the brushes and pins, her face once more as still and unreadable as stone. That night, Praskovya lay in a strange bed in a strange room, and she pressed Ilya's iron ring to her lips, and she made herself a single, silent promise. Whatever waited for her at the end of this road, she would not die there. She would learn its secrets. She would survive its cruelties. And one day, somehow, she would find her way back to the boy running through the snow. The carriage rolled on at dawn. By dusk on the second day, the trees grew taller, blacker, denser, the road narrowed, the horses began to sweat despite the cold, and then, rising from the mist like something out of an old grandmother's tale, she saw it. The estate of Lord Vsevolod Karenin, a great house of dark stone, with towers that pierced the low grey sky, and windows that glowed faintly red in the failing light, as though something inside were burning. And waiting at the iron gates, perfectly still, perfectly silent, stood a tall figure in a long black cloak, watching her arrive. The carriage halted before the iron gates with a groan of wood and leather. The figure in the black cloak did not move, did not lift a hand in greeting, did not step forward to open the door. The figure only watched, motionless as a statue, as the thin man dismounted and unlocked the carriage from the outside. Praskovya stepped down onto the frozen gravel. Her legs trembled beneath the heavy red dress. The cold bit through the fur lining, as though the cloth were paper. The figure in the cloak finally moved. Slow, measured steps, boots crunching softly on the ice. The hood was pulled low. She could see nothing of the face beneath, only the pale curve of a jaw, the faint mist of breath rising into the dusk. A voice spoke from beneath the hood, low, quiet, strangely soft. The voice told her to come inside. The voice told her she must be cold. She had expected cruelty. She had expected mockery. She had not expected gentleness, and the gentleness frightened her more than any whip could have. She followed the cloaked figure through the iron gates, through a courtyard of dark stone, through great oak doors that swung open without a hand touching them. Servants stood along the walls of the entrance hall, their heads bowed, their faces blank. Not one of them looked at her. Not one of them looked at the Lord. She was led up a wide staircase, down a long corridor, lined with portraits of stern men and pale women, and into a chamber at the very end. A fire burned in the hearth. A meal of bread and cold meat waited on a small table. The cloaked figure gestured for her to enter, then stepped inside behind her and closed the door. For the first time, they were alone. The figure stood by the door for a long moment, perfectly still. Then slowly, very slowly, the gloved hands rose and pulled back the hood. Praskovya forgot how to breathe. The face beneath the hood was not the face of a man. It was the face of a young woman, perhaps no older than 25, with sharp cheekbones and a wide, serious mouth, and eyes the colour of pale winter honey. Her hair was cut short, shorter than any woman Praskovya had ever seen, falling in dark waves to the line of her jaw. There was a small scar across the bridge of her nose. There was an expression in her eyes that Praskovya could not name. Fear, perhaps, or something very close to it. Praskovya took a step back. Her legs struck the small table. She caught herself with one hand and stared, and could not stop staring. The young woman in the Lord's clothes spoke again, still that soft, low voice, carefully pitched, carefully held. She said her name was not Vsevolod. She said her true name was Yelizaveta. She said the Lord Praskovya had been sold to had been her brother, the real Vsevolod Karenin, and that he had died 2 years ago of a fever, in the dead of winter, with no witnesses but herself and the old housekeeper Glafira. She said that if anyone outside these walls learned of his death, the estate would be seized by the Tsar, the lands would be taken, the servants would be turned out into the snow. And she, an unmarried woman with no male protector, would be sent to a convent to die forgotten. So she had cut her hair, she had bound her chest, she had put on her brother's clothes, she had learned to lower her voice, and to ride like a man, and to sign his name on every document the world demanded. For 2 years she had been Lord Vsevolod Karenin. For 2 years She had ruled the estate as a ghost wearing her brother's face. Praskovya could not speak. Yelizaveta took a careful step closer. Her honey eyes were wet now, though no tears fell. She said she had not wanted to buy a girl. She said the Council of Nobles had grown suspicious. They had whispered that the young Lord Vsevolod kept no wife, no mistress, no woman of any kind. They had begun to ask questions she could not answer. So she had paid 200 silver rubles for a bride, the way a desperate woman buys a shield. She said she was sorry. She said she knew there were no words to make this right. She said Praskovya's life was now bound to her own, because the secret they shared was a secret the Tsar would punish with death, both their deaths, slowly, in a public square. Praskovya looked at the young woman standing before her in a dead man's coat, and she felt the world she had known fall completely away. The cruel lord did not exist. The monster had been a frightened girl all along, and the iron ring against her chest, the boy running through the snow, the spring that had been promised, all of it was further away now than the moon. Yelizaveta whispered a single question into the silence between them. Would Praskovya keep the secret, or would she destroy them both? Praskovya opened her mouth to answer, and from somewhere deep in the great house a bell began to ring. The bell rang 3 times and stopped. Yelizaveta's face went the colour of old paper. She moved fast, faster than Praskovya would have believed possible, crossing the room in 3 long strides and pulling the hood back over her dark hair. She whispered that the bell meant a visitor at the gate, an unexpected one, the kind that did not come at this hour for kind reasons. She turned to Praskovya with something raw and pleading in her honey eyes. She said there was no time. She said the choice had to be made now. She said if Praskovya screamed, if Praskovya ran into the corridor and called for the soldiers, both their lives would end before the moon rose. Praskovya stood very still. She thought of her mother weeping on the cottage floor. She thought of Ilya running through the snow. She thought of the 200 silver rubles that had been the price of her body, and she thought of the frightened young woman standing before her now, who had paid them not out of cruelty, but out of terror. She thought of every story she had ever heard about brave girls. They were always saved by men. They were always rescued. They were never the ones holding another woman's life in their own trembling hands. She walked across the room. She picked up the heavy black cloak that had fallen across the chair. She held it out to Yelizaveta without a word. Yelizaveta's eyes filled. She took the cloak. She fastened it at her throat with shaking fingers. She whispered a word that Praskovya did not catch, something old, something that sounded like a prayer. Then she opened the chamber door and stepped into the corridor, and she became Lord Vsevolod Karenin once more. Praskovya was left alone in the firelight. She moved to the small window and pressed her face to the glass. Down in the courtyard, torches were burning. 3 riders had dismounted. One of them wore the long blue coat of the Tsar's personal guard, and Praskovya knew, even from this distance, even through the frost on the window, that this was no ordinary visit. She watched Yelizaveta cross the courtyard. She watched her stand tall in her brother's boots, her voice carrying low and steady on the cold air, every gesture a careful lie. She watched the guard hand over a sealed letter. She watched Yelizaveta read it by torchlight, and even at this distance, Praskovya saw the small flinch, the smallest tightening of the shoulders that no servant would have noticed. Something in that letter had frightened her. When Yelizaveta returned to the chamber an hour later, she did not speak at first. She stood by the fire and stared into the flames as though they might give her an answer. Her hood was down. Her hair was disordered. She looked very young and very tired and very alone. Praskovya, who had grown up serving others, did the only thing she knew to do. She poured a cup of warm wine from the jug on the table. She walked to the fire. She placed the cup gently in Yelizaveta's hand. Yelizaveta looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice barely louder than the fire itself, that the Tsar's cousin would be arriving in 3 weeks. He was coming to inspect the estate. He was coming to meet the young Lord Karenin, and he was coming, most particularly, to meet the Lord's new bride. 3 weeks. To learn how to walk like a noblewoman, to learn how to speak like one, to learn how to lie beside a stranger and call her husband in front of men who killed for sport. Praskovya understood that she had not been saved. She had only been moved from one cage into another, but this cage, she realized slowly, was a cage she now shared. And the woman beside her was not a monster, but a soul as trapped as her own, holding a secret that would hang them both from the same rope. She took Yelizaveta's free hand. She did not know why she did it. She only knew that the hand was cold and shaking and human. She said quietly that she would keep the secret. She said it not for love, not yet. Love was a word for spring, for boys with iron rings, for girls who still believed in soft endings. She said it because the world had given them both the same enemy and the same gallows, and the same single chance to outlive it. Yelizaveta closed her eyes. A single tear escaped and ran down the small scar across her nose. Outside, the snow began to fall again, heavy, silent, burying the road behind them, burying the village of Ostrovka, burying the boy still standing somewhere in the dark, with his hand outstretched toward a carriage that was never coming back. And in the great stone house of Lord Vsevolod Karenin, 2 frightened young women stood by a dying fire, holding hands, waiting for a dawn that would change everything. What they did not know, what neither of them could yet imagine, was that the letter from the Tsar's cousin had not been a warning at all. It had been a trap, and someone inside the house had already been paid to spring it. The morning came pale and quiet, the way mornings do when the world has been buried under fresh snow. Praskovya woke in a bed that was not her own, in a chamber bigger than the entire cottage she had been born in. For one strange heartbeat, she did not remember where she was. Then she felt the unfamiliar weight of a silk shift against her skin, and the small ache of cold in her fingers, and it all came back at once. The carriage, the iron gates, the young woman in a dead man's clothes, the promise made beside a dying fire. She rose slowly. She crossed to the window and looked out over the white world. The estate stretched further than her eyes could follow, fields and forests and frozen ponds, all of it now somehow part of the lie she had agreed to live inside. Somewhere out beyond those trees, her mother was waking in an empty cottage. Somewhere out there, Ilya was searching every road for word of her. They would never find her here, not as the girl they had known. That girl was gone. She had been left behind in the snow, beside the small black smudge of a boy still running. Praskovya pressed her forehead to the cold glass and let herself feel it, just for a moment, the grief, the fear, the strange, trembling tenderness for the woman sleeping in the chamber across the hall, who had wept a single tear and trusted her with both their lives. Then she straightened. She dressed herself in the gown Glafira had laid out by the door. She braided her dark hair the way noble women wore theirs, the way she had seen once in a painting in the entrance hall. She practiced her steps across the wooden floor, slow, measured, the walk of a lady who had never washed another woman's linen in cold water. She was no longer Praskovya, the peasant girl. She was Praskovya Karenina, the new bride of Lord Vsevolod, and in 3 weeks the Tsar's cousin would come, and she would have to be perfect, or they would both die. When she stepped into the corridor, Glafira was waiting. The old housekeeper looked at her for a long moment with those wet stone eyes. Then, very slowly, she inclined her head. It was not a bow. It was something smaller and stranger and far more meaningful. It was the nod one survivor gives another when they recognize that the second has just learned what the first learned long ago. Glafira said softly that the Lord was waiting in the library. Glafira said the lessons would begin today. Praskovya followed her down the corridor, past the portraits of stern men and pale women, past the door that led to the east wing, the door she had been told never to open. She paused, just for a heartbeat, and looked at it. There were 3 locks on that door, 3 heavy iron locks, the kind a man uses when he is hiding something he cannot bear to look at. She thought of the 3 brides the village had whispered of. She thought of Yelizaveta's brother, dead of a fever 2 winters ago, she wondered, with a small cold thread winding through her chest, if those 2 stories were truly the same story. She walked on. In the library, Yelizaveta was waiting by the fire, dressed once more as Lord Vsevolod, her short dark hair brushed neatly, her honey eyes calm in a way they had not been the night before. She turned as Praskovya entered. For a long moment, the 2 of them simply looked at one another. 2 strangers, 2 prisoners, 2 women holding the same rope. Yelizaveta said quietly that she did not know how to thank her. Praskovya said quietly that she did not want to be thanked. She wanted to be taught everything: how to stand, how to speak, how to lie with a smile, how to survive in a world that ate girls like her for sport. Yelizaveta's mouth lifted at one corner. It was not quite a smile. It was something braver than a smile. She said the lessons would not be gentle. She said there was very little time. She said they would begin with the dance. Outside the library window, the snow kept falling. The estate of Lord Vsevolod Karenin stood silent and watchful in the white morning, and somewhere within its walls, hidden in the shadows of a corridor neither woman had thought to check, a servant pressed a folded letter into the gloved hand of a man on horseback, and whispered that the new bride had arrived. The man rode south at a gallop, toward Moscow, toward the Tsar's cousin, toward a fate that neither Praskovya nor Yelizaveta yet knew was coming for them. Have you ever loved someone you were never supposed to love? Have you ever kept a secret that could cost you everything? If you have, then you already know what Praskovya is about to learn. That the heart does not ask for permission. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the choosing of another soul over your own safety. That sometimes the cruelest lord in all of Russia is just a frightened girl in a borrowed coat, waiting to be seen. If this story has touched something in you, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me. And the traitor inside the house is closer than either of them can imagine.